Well, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Paradigm Biopharmaceutical presentation. By way of background and introduction, my name is Seth Schwartz. I'm the Managing Director and Head of JP Morgan's Healthcare Investment Banking practice here in Australia. It gives me great honour to introduce Donna Skerritt, who is the Interim CEO of Paradigm and will lead today's presentation. So with that, over to you, Donna.
Thank you. Have the next slide, please. Paradigm is a publicly traded company, so please note the disclaimer. Thank you. Next slide. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about Paradigm. We're an Australian company founded in 2014, listed on the exchange in 2015. And our objective is to repurpose agents, and we aim to develop new solutions for medical indications with high unmet needs by repurposing underutilized molecules. Our lead candidate is pentosan polysulfate sodium. Pentosan is an FDA-approved drug with a 60-year track record of treating inflammation. Our lead program is in osteoarthritis. This is a phase 3 asset with a 72 million addressable population in key markets. We have an estimated annual revenue potential exceeding $10 billion at just 10% penetration of the adjustable market in knee and hip osteoarthritis. We retain global harmony to achieve simultaneous registration in key jurisdictions. We've established safety and efficacy in the phase 2B trial, which provided encouraging evidence of meaningful treatment effects and responses to injectable PPS compared to placebo overall for pain, function, and patient global impression of change. We also have real-world evidence via a very large SAS program and an EAP program. Our IP consists of a strong portfolio of IP protection and patents on injectable PPS. These patents are in all key markets until 2040. We've also secured scalable manufacturing slide from the only FDA-approved manufacturer of this drug, Bene Pharmachem. We have an exclusive agreement with them for 25 years from the date of marketing approval, and that exclusive agreement covers all major markets. Our pipeline is broad. In addition to OA, I will share with you the other indications that we're pursuing, and I'll also share with you the reasons why we're able to look at this broad range of indications. Next slide, please. What does our leadership look like? Our leadership exists of a team with unique global scientific, regulatory, and pharmaceutical development capabilities, abilities that are required to identify, develop, and commercialize these opportunities. The team is focused on driving the clinical execution of Paradigm's programs. Our founder and CEO, Mr. Paul Rennie, has transitioned to chairman and will focus on commercial discussions and strategic partnerships in that role. And we are undertaking a global search for a new company CEO. Next slide, please. Just a broad look at our pipeline. As I mentioned, our lead program is osteoarthritis. We have 2 open clinical trials in this area. One is our phase 3 dose confirmation and efficacy study. The second is a synovial fluid biomarker study. Both of these studies are enrolling. The first study is aiming to demonstrate pain and function, and it's a global study to meet registration requirements in key markets. The second study on synovial biomarkers is really to inform us of disease-modifying potential of PPS in osteoarthritis. We're also working in MPS mucopolysaccharidosis. These are a group of rare congenital metabolic disorders caused by an absence or malfunction of lysosomal enzymes that are needed to break down glycosaminoglycans. And despite primary treatment for many of these conditions, persistent musculoskeletal symptoms occur such that patients have ongoing pain and difficulty with function. We're actively enrolling in 2 clinical trials in MPS, one in MPS 1 in Australia, the other in MPS 6, which is in Brazil. There are also future indications that we're pursuing, including respiratory, heart failure, and alpha virus-induced arthralgia. And while we're executing on the OA lead program as well as the MPS program, we're simultaneously looking at ways in which we can enhance the delivery system to impact patient convenience. We're working on reimbursement strategy. We're engaging with advisory groups, and we're trying to better understand patient needs by research and acceptance testing. Next slide, please. A little bit about the mechanism of action of PPS. PPS interacts with multiple pathogenic pathways, providing multimodal approach to inflammatory and degenerative conditions. As you can see from the slide, PPS has direct effects on inflammation, pain, tissue preservation, and improved blood flow. But it also has effects on these pathways through NF-kappa B. So there are 2 separate pathways by which PPS becomes a very relevant drug for addressing diseases of pain, inflammation, and degeneration. And these mechanisms of action provide insight into the effects of PPS in these indications, and provide support for us for the observation seen in clinical studies to date. On the lower left-hand corner of this slide, we've sketched out our understanding to date of which mechanisms of action are relevant to the various diseases in our pipeline. Next slide, please. Now I'll speak a little bit more about the osteoarthritis program. Next slide. Osteoarthritis, as many know, is a blockbuster market opportunity. Our drug xylitol aims to meet a significant unmet need in osteoarthritis. It's estimated that in 2020, about 72 million people are affected by osteoarthritis in the markets in the US, EU5, Canada, and Australia. And by 2030, this number is expected to grow to 120 million. About 69% of OA patients are affected by knee and hip OA. And importantly, 81% of patients are dissatisfied with their current treatment options. So if we look at the US alone, where OA is predicted to increase by 86% in 2030, that is a population of 67 million in the US alone. Importantly, if we think about the patients who are dissatisfied with their current treatment and base our target uptakes on a small proportion of those patients, we do estimate that the market size potential for IPPS in OA would exceed 10 billion with these conservative estimates. Next slide, please. The OA clinical program is enrolling into a globally harmonized protocol designed for registration in multiple jurisdictions. And as I mentioned, this program has begun enrollment. In the United States, the IND has been cleared by the FDA. Approximately 56 sites have been selected, and ethics approval received, and our lead investigators confirmed site activation activities are in progress. In Australia, sites have been selected. Several of these sites have initiated screening of participants, and our first subjects have been randomized at Australian sites for this phase 3 program. We've also identified sites in Europe and the UK. Lead investigators have been identified, and we're expecting initiation and screening to commence in calendar year 22. Next slide. The OA pipeline is broad. The program aims to develop and address multiple aspects of OA treatment. The current phase 3 program is addressing pain and function. With those programs, there will be extension follow-up studies in which we'll evaluate duration of effect. We also have an ongoing biomarker study in Australia to inform us better of the effects of biomarkers and their disease-modifying potential. Additionally, we are undertaking a canine study, which will give us additional follow-up data on canine models, since the duration of effects in a canine model can be realized over a longer lifespan of the animal in a shorter period of time. We also are working on expanding the label in two important areas. One is retreatment. Given this is a chronic condition, we are going to evaluate retreatment schedules. And additionally, as I mentioned, the majority of OA patients have knee and hip involvement, knee or hip involvement. And so we'll be looking at a study of OA hip. And so below, the key milestones are shown for these programs. Importantly, as I mentioned, first subjects have been randomized into the phase 3 program called Para-002. Dose selection will be in the first half of calendar year 2023, after which we will open the confirmatory study as well. The Para-08 study will have primary endpoint readout estimated at third quarter of this calendar year 2022. And we expect to also be informed of the canine study extended follow-up during the first half of calendar year 2023. For the programs evaluating retreatment and hip OA, the timelines will be confirmed following the dose selection. Next slide, please. Now, a few comments about other activity in our pipeline. Importantly, I want to share the activity in MPS. This is an orphan disease where patients with MPS who may be treated with primary treatment, being that enzyme replacement therapy or sometimes bone marrow transplant, may still have residual musculoskeletal symptoms that result in ongoing pain and impair their function. And the potential for PPS in this indication has been demonstrated in preclinical work as well as pilot study. So they support the use of PPS for the management of pain, anti-inflammatory effects, possibly chondroprotective effects, and also reduction of GAGs. The current clinical programs are shown on the left side of the slide. MPS 1 is enrolling in Australia. This is an open label study enrolling up to 10 subjects where patients will be dosed for a total of 52 weeks. And below, the MPS phase 2 study in Brazil, which is a double-blind placebo-enrolled trial of 12 subjects. And the primary endpoint is safety with key secondary endpoints that will assess efficacy. Importantly, we've had interactions to understand what a global phase 3 program might look like. And so the proposed future study will be a pivotal global phase 3 study to evaluate MPS 6. The findings from MPS 6 may be relevant to other types of MPS depending on the jurisdiction. Other MPS types have shown potential in animal and humans to improve neurological and musculoskeletal manifestations with PPS. So Paradigm will continue to evaluate the use and effectiveness of PPS in other MPS types. This is a program that I mentioned is an orphan indication. We are seeking a partner to accelerate development of the MPS program. Next slide, please. This next slide describes further the expanded goal of repurposing and identifying solutions to unmet needs and looking at the potential of PPS in other indications based on our understanding of its mode of action. So we are working in the area of alpha virus-induced arthralgia, where the relevant action targets are anti-inflammatory effects, effects on NGF for reducing pain, and cartilage degeneration targets. We've also undertaken some preclinical work in heart failure, and here the effects of PPS are expected to be those around adverse tissue remodeling, anti-inflammatory effects, and vascular endothelial inflammation targets. We've recently also done some work in respiratory area. The modes of action here would be anti-inflammatory cytokine storm targets through NF-kappa B, inhibition of complement activation, and antiviral effects. So in each of these areas, preclinical work is being undertaken to better understand what the translation potential for these indications may be. Next slide, please. So in summary, I'd like to say that we have an active phase 3 program. We are actively screening and enrolling participants. We've obtained regulatory feedback for a harmonized clinical protocol to achieve simultaneous registration in key jurisdictions. And we've done this by spending a lot of time to develop a non-clinical portfolio, as well as having interactions with regulatory authorities to make sure that the program meets the requirements for various jurisdictions for subsequent submission for approval. The clinical program has been designed to support a broad label to maximize reimbursement price and market penetration from the time of launch. We also, as I mentioned, have a very promising pipeline. The indications that we're looking at include mucopolysaccharidosis, which is in clinical trials now, respiratory indications, including acute respiratory distress syndrome and SARS-CoV-2 activity. We have done preclinical work in heart failure and are evaluating the translational potential of those findings now. And we've done work in alpha virus to look at musculoskeletal effects of alpha virus with PPS therapy. So we have an extensive preclinical dossier of PPS supporting multiple indications, as well as 2 programs in the clinic and 3 programs that are being evaluated for translation to the clinic. In terms of our commercialization goals, we are looking at global and regional sales model. We are interested in marketing and distribution licensing discussions, and we are actively engaged in discussions with potential partners regarding our programs. With that, I'll close and thank the hosts for the opportunity to share PPS story with Paradigm Pharmaceutical with this audience. Thank you.